Such a special privilege for me to introduce the Surgeon General of the United States, Dr. Everett Koop, to you today. He's a man whose strong leadership and courage in dealing with the issues of health in our world today have made him a hero in the mind of many Americans. Dr. Koop came to the position of Surgeon General with so many credentials that I don't dare give them to you this afternoon. Instead, I'll just give you a few highlights. He started by receiving his training at Dartmouth, Cornell Medical School, and the Graduate School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. He was Surgeon-in-Chief at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia from 1948 to 1981. During this time, he became world-renowned for developing many new and highly successful procedures of surgery for newborns. Besides serving as professor of pediatric surgery and later as professor of pediatrics at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, Dr. Koop founded the Journal of Pediatric Surgery and served as its editor-in-chief for 12 years. He's the author of more than 175 articles and books that relate to the practice of medicine, including the field of medical ethics. The driving force in Dr. Koop's professional and private life has been the care and nurture of children. And it's for that reason, even more than for the fact that he is our Surgeon General, that we proudly welcome him today as our keynote speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Baker. It is a pleasure to be here. And I think the first thing I'd like to do is to congratulate the organizers of this conference, the Parents Music Resource Center, in cooperation with the American Academy of Pediatrics, of which I'm a member, the National Mental Health Association, and National Youth Suicide Center, and the American Academy of Child Psychiatry. Because by taking this initiative, you've shown a kind of leadership that's unusual, and I'm delighted that you're examining the adverse entertainment media message in today's popular youth culture and consider what we might do to counteract it. Now, the efforts of these organizations and their staffs have provided you with a very packed agenda. But I'd like to suggest, my friends, that that's a very distressing piece of information, because in the best of all worlds, we shouldn't have very much to say about any of these matters. There ought not to be enough to fill even one morning's program of one day. But as you know, that is not the case, because today we are confronting a number of issues which are a test of our faith as citizens, our faith as concerned professionals, and our faith as human beings. Pornography is one of these issues. We perceive that pornography is a destructive phenomenon. We understand that it does not contribute anything to society, but rather takes away from and diminishes what we regard as the social good. Certainly one of the most difficult aspects of our concern with pornography was expressed by the Attorney General, Mr. Edwin Meese, when he said, "It is abundantly clear that with pornography we are not dealing with one passing incident, one magazine, one play, one film. We're dealing with a general tendency that is pervading our entire culture, including the culture known to very young children." And that's a very important key observation. In the past, we've been concerned almost exclusively with adult bookstores and the movie theaters that have specialized in pornography, but it's no longer quite that simple. Now we have rock videos without control and frequently viewed without parents even being aware of their children's activity. And many that I have seen are a combination of senseless violence and senseless pornography to the beat of rock music. Many of you probably know that the Attorney General asked me to prepare a report on the health effects of pornography on children, and I'd like to tell you what the conclusions of my expert panel were on this subject. First, quote, "Children and adolescents who participate in the production of pornography experience adverse enduring effects," unquote. This kind of thing has marred these children and was regarded by the participants as sexual victimization of young people, pure and simple. They noted, for example, the connection between involvement in the production of pornographic materials and subsequent involvement in child prostitution. Second, the participants of my panel agreed that, quote, prolonged use of pornography increases belief that less common sexual practices are more common, unquote. Now, this should come as no surprise, since the conclusion is the same that occurs when we talk about violence and other antisocial activities. Repeated exposure to them via television, for example, or movies, such as the so-called slasher films, tends to build up the impression that people are carrying out such antisocial activities much more often than is actually the case. Third, quote, pornography that portrays sexual aggression as pleasurable for the victim increases the acceptance of the use of coercion in sexual relations, unquote. Now, I'm certain that this kind of pornography is the cause for much of the rape that occurs in our society today. Impressionable men, many of them still in adolescence, see this stuff, get the impression that women like to be hurt, to be humiliated, to be forced to do things that they don't want to do, or appear to be forced to do things they really do want to do. It's another false stereotype, another vicious kind of mythology, but this one almost certainly leads to the pain and even to the death of victimized women. Fourth, quote, acceptance of coercive sexuality appears to be related to sexual aggression. Now, this consensus statement, along with the previous one, completes the circle of sexual violence. In other words, if a man sees a steady stream of sexually violent material in which the victim seems to be liking it, he begins to get the idea that coercion and violence are acceptable in sexual relations. But then, said the workshop participants, he will very likely take the next step. He will convert this attitude into his own behavior. In other words, he will become the perpetrator he's been reading about or watching in pornographic films and videos. And finally, my panel said, in laboratory studies measuring short-term effects, exposure to violent pornography increases punitive behavior toward women. Now, this is obviously impossible to prove by controlled experiments. It's difficult to accumulate hard data on pornography because of the overriding ethic that prevents us from doing harm to the human subjects in research. Nevertheless, this fifth conclusion is safe enough to draw from the few experiments that have been done. I think it's fair to say that based on these consensus statements, that pornography does stimulate attitudes and behavior that have gravely negative consequences for individuals and hence for our society. These outcomes impair the mental, emotional, and physical health of children and adults, and that's clear enough, and many thus contribute significantly to the morbidity burden in our society. But if we leave pornography aside for a moment, there is on TV and in the movies a lot of sex without pornography, but it's also without responsibility and it's without morality. We funded some research recently that was done on this matter by Michigan State University. The research has found, for example, that a large number of 9th and 10th grade girls in 4 Michigan cities watch between 1 and 2 hours of soap operas every afternoon after school. And what were they viewing? The researchers report that, among other things, sexual intercourse among unmarried partners was shown or discussed at midday soap operas on the average of 1.56 times per hour. The worst offender was All My Children. In the evening, a larger number of 9th and 10th grade girls are joined by their brothers, and they watch 3 to 4 hours of prime time television. Now, on these evening shows, acts of unmarried intercourse are shown or discussed on the average of once an hour. And by far the worst offender is Dynasty. Now, these shows are not my opinions, remember, but those of the researchers at Michigan State. The same researchers also found that over 60 to 70% of the same 9th and 10th graders saw the top 5 R-rated movies, in which sexual intercourse between unmarried partners, again, are cut on the average of 8 times per film. The worst offenders, 15 times per film. were Porky #2 and Fast Times at Ridgemont High, a movie so popular among young people that it has been turned into a television series. Again, not my opinion, but the researchers. Now, our children don't live in a vacuum, and I'm sure you know that. They live in a real world of pleasure and of danger, along with the rest of us. But we, adults, have some experience with it and some sense of how to survive in it with our lives and our values still intact. And I believe, therefore, that each of us in our homes or in our schools has the moral responsibility to pass that information on to our children. I can tell you that the government, the United States Public Health Service in particular, is pledged to help in this effort to the extent that it can. As the Surgeon General, I have had to take the lead position in this, and that's what I've done gladly. As you know, much of my time over the past year has been dealing with the issue of AIDS. I have often said that morality and science go hand in hand in the prevention of AIDS, and a major concern has been sex and AIDS education in children. My experience with the media, surprisingly enough, has been a positive one, and I'd like to tell you about it. For many of our young people, the entertainment industry is the primary sex educator. The stories and the characters influence their sexual attitudes, their values, and their behaviors. The country needs the assistance of the entertainment industry, for without it we cannot win the fight against AIDS. I took myself out to Hollywood to meet with representatives of the television entertainment industry, and in preparation for that, I reviewed the shows An Early Frost, An Enemy Among Us, and episodes of L.A. Law and St. Elsewhere. It was clearly demonstrated that television does have the ability, when it wants to present AIDS issues in an informing, moving, and sensitive way. The television industry has done a superb job of getting the basic facts of AIDS out to the American people. The entertainment industry has educated with facts in the context of real-life situations that people can relate to. And that hasn't been easy to do, given the subject and given the usual brief attention span of the American people. They've been outstanding in the variety of approaches and formats they use to do this complicated job of public education. In fact, they've done such a good job with the basic facts, along with their colleagues in the print media, that a group of researchers at Columbia University found these things. One, between June #83 and August '86, the percentage of the population who said they had heard or read about AIDS increased from 77 to 99%. Secondly, there are virtually no differences among demographic categories in the percentage of those aware of AIDS. Media coverage appears to have obliterated the awareness gap between population subgroups. Now, these researchers were looking at the joint surveys done by ABC and the New York Daily News and the Washington Post, by CBS and the New York Times, and by NBC and the Wall Street Journal, as well as surveys by Roper, Harris, Gallup, and others. As a plain citizen, as well as your Surgeon General, I value what entertainment television has done for popular understanding of the disease of AIDS. And I'm pleased to have read in the newspapers that writers and producers are taking the sexual content of their programs into consideration relative to AIDS. I understand that movie and TV characters will be responding this year to the AIDS issue, and entertainment television can bring these issues to the public in a way which government never can. Surveys here and there indicate a marked swing away from frequent, casual sex with many different partners for both heterosexuals and homosexuals, and toward low-risk sexual relations with one partner, namely monogamy. Now, what must be learned and perhaps relearned, and children are not too young to learn it, and what we need to reinforce among the population in general, is there's much more to human relationships than just good sex. Sexuality is just one aspect of human relationships. It's something, but it's not everything. And if you believe otherwise, then you ought to prepare yourself for the worst, because the most devastating, fatal disease in recent times, AIDS, is now being transmitted from one person to another, mainly through sex, that is, heterosexual relationships as well as homosexual relationships. Now, this is extremely important information for young people, especially those who are entering a period in their lives marked by great curiosity and some experimentation. The sexually transmitted diseases, gonorrhea, syphilis, chlamydia, are on the rise in young people, gone up 34% this year over last, especially among blacks and Hispanics, and we have a measure of their sexual activity in the more than 1 million unplanned pregnancies among teenagers last year. And in the past, if any of them had a misadventure along the way, short of pregnancy itself, we had a number of antibiotic therapies to bring them back to full health. But a misadventure that produces an AIDS infection is still beyond the control of modern medicine because AIDS is 100% fatal. We have no vaccine to stop it, and we won't have one for many years. We have no miracle drug on the horizon, and I don't think we'll have one of those in this century either. Right now, the very best we can hope for is that people who are becoming sexually active will have a heightened awareness of who they are, how they care about themselves, and how they care about others. And you can illustrate this on television and moving picture characters by having them talk openly about sex, but do so in loving, caring, kind, and considerate ways in the context of the family. Sexuality in this age of AIDS can be both life-giving or death-giving, but we must choose life, and I would agree that life is more likely to be found in an equitable relationship between two people who are mutually respectful, thoughtful, loving, and caring. In such relationships, there most definitely will be sex, but it is sex without exploitation, it's sex without fear and domination, it's sex without syphilis, gonorrhea, and guilt, and it's sex without AIDS. Now, I'm telling you all this in my language, but I hope that the industry can do better than that because, in a sense, they already have. I've seen thoughtful, caring relationships built into shows like The Cosby Show, Cagney and Lacey, The Golden Girls, and then there are films like Roxanne, La Bamba, and Living Daylights. The best shows on AIDS I have seen is a recent episode of CBS's Designing Women. It covers all of the AIDS issues in a sensitive and effective way. Some messages you like, others you might not. The point is that there is a message for everyone wherever he stands. It's a model of quality and public service for others to emulate. Entertainment television has been proactive and, in a sense, more responsible than they have been in the past. For example, among others, here are a few of their own recommended guidelines, which I went over with them when I spent my time in Hollywood several weeks back. Recognize sex as a healthy and natural part of life, requiring responsibility to oneself and one's partner. Encourage parent and child conversations about sex, which include information about preventing sexually transmitted diseases. Recognize that all segments of society are at potential risk of AIDS. Characters with AIDS should not only be depicted as homosexual, intravenous drug abusers, and white people. And finally, the consequences of unprotected sex should also be indicated. Now, I'm told that films with a lessened emphasis on sex are also doing good business, as they say in the industry, and apparently the public, and young people in particular, are happy to receive and to pay for this kind of richer and more realistic message, a message that right now is our best and only protection against the fatal sexually transmitted disease of AIDS. This certainly is an area where entertainment television can excel, because it brings into our living rooms and theaters characters that provide role models for our children, characters that could demonstrate the kind of sexual responsibility, respect for self and others that will stop AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases, unwanted pregnancies as well, and could produce a generation of well-adjusted adults. Although it seems unlikely that there will be an explosive epidemic in the heterosexual population, as there was among homosexuals and bisexual men back in 1981 and 82, that does not reduce the individual risk to those who practice high-risk sexual behavior. So I look forward to perhaps a few years hence when I might return to Hollywood and thank the television entertainment industry again, but this time it will be for the job they've done in illuminating the full experience of human sexuality and human relationships, and for their role in helping to recommit our single and singular nation to the principles of compassion and of justice in the face of a deadly epidemic. Television programming, series, movies of the week, and dramatic productions can do a lot to restore the sexual and the moral health of this nation. I had originally planned to speak to you this noontime only on pornography, but you already know where I stand on that, and many of you have read the proceedings of the Surgeon General's workshop on pornography. What I wanted to do was to share my experience with the entertainment media concerning AIDS. I wanted to leave you with a message that has some hope in it and let you know that changes are being made. That positive messages to our young people can be incorporated through the media and into the youth culture. I think all of you here know that I'm not a Pollyanna. In fact, I'm very often put in the role of a grim prophet. But I say that, given the proper leadership and incentives, our society can be changed, and I will join with you in an attempt to do that. And as the poet says, let the world be a better place, and let it start with me. Thank you.